Live from ND Studios, Notre Dame, Indiana, this is the Rhythms of Faith podcast. Welcome to the Rhythms of Faith podcast. Today we're joined by Father Innocent Smith, who's an assistant professor here in the Department of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. Father Innocent, welcome to the Rhythms of Faith podcast. Thanks for being here with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Could you start just by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got here to Notre Dame?
Yeah. So
this iteration.
Yeah. So I've been here at Notre Dame for just about 6 months now in my current iteration. I studied here as an undergraduate as well. So I kind of know the place, but it's changed a lot, grown a lot in the years, as have I hope, in different ways. Yeah, so I came to join the Liturgical Studies faculty in the Department of Theology. And it's just really been a great joy to be here and be teaching this semester undergraduates on a course called Liturgy in the Arts, as well as graduate students with liturgical year. So really happy to be here on this podcast to share some thoughts on all these issues.
Awesome. And how did you get interested in liturgy in the first place?
Yeah, so I think as a small child, I started getting interested in liturgy when I'd go to church with my parents because I found it all very confusing and also attractive. You know, I asked my mom one time, how do those adults learn the important things, like what to say at Mass? I was so confused because it seemed like so many different responses people would have. And then over time, I got less interested, as teenagers often do, but then kind of encountered the liturgy anew as a high school student and really fell in love, particularly with Gregorian chant as a form of praying. And that sort of helped me get interested in it in a new way. And then my interest in liturgical studies as a discipline kind of started, I think, when I started to notice, I was staying at a Benedictine monastery, and I noticed the antiphons they'd sing at Vespers were connected with the gospel they would sing at Mass, and just starting to realize there's a connection between all these different things. And I think that question to understand why things are the way they are is kind of embedded within liturgical studies.
So some of that mystery started to get unwrapped.
Yeah, because I think the more you learn, the more you see there's a logic to it and yet also a mystery to it. Yeah. And that there's also so many different forms of the liturgy in history and throughout the church today. And just learning that great richness was for me an ever increasing source of fascination.
Cool. So since you served it up, Gregorian chant, what is it? What got you interested in it? What can we learn about it, especially in 2026?
Yeah, great question. So Pope Leo right now is having a retreat at the Vatican, and Bishop Varden, a Cistercian monk who's now the bishop of one of the bishops in Norway, he was just giving a retreat talk the other day that he published on his blog, which is interesting to think we're getting from the Vatican to a blog, and now we can talk about it. So he was reflecting on the tract, which is one of the Gregorian chants for the first Sunday of Lent. And so during the Lenten Gospel, we hear about Jesus being tempted by the devil in the wilderness, and the devil quotes some of the lines of the Psalms selectively to try to tempt Jesus. And then the tract gives you then a long response. So you hear the whole thing in context. And Bishop Varden made a beautiful point, which is Gregorian chant is not just a matter of kind of a historical curiosity, but it's actually a musical exegesis. So through its musical content, it helps us to think about those words, meditate on them. So I'd say the definition of Gregorian chant would be psalms set to music in a way that you can sing for different purposes, sometimes to kind of enter a church, sometimes to meditate on the reading, sometimes to accompany people as they're receiving communion. So the Gregorian chant tradition has this breadth of forms, but it's fundamentally founded on the Word of God and kind of setting it to music in a way that can be illuminating for the meaning of the text themselves.
And do I have to be proficient in music in order to get something out of Gregorian chant or understand it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the original repertoire of chant is written in Latin. There's also English adaptations that are sung in some churches. And so that can be one way of getting access to it. I think it's one of these things where some chants are very simple, some are very complex, and they kind of were made originally, some to be sung by the whole congregation, others to be sung by a choir and a soloist. But I think one of the remarkable things is the repertoire is limited in its scope and yet has an infinite variety within it. So it's one of those things where people can get into it to different degrees, and some people can appreciate it as kind of background music, meditation music. Other people can appreciate it as singers themselves. And I think just finding that range of what kind of fits your needs.
Very cool. Yeah, because I think one of the interesting things about chant in general is it's a very sort of like I don't want to say pure, but I want to say something like fundamental exposition of music, because it's at its heart, it's just words set to a single melody.
Right.
But I think one of the things that's easily lost is, especially if it's in Latin, is it's hard to appreciate why the melody does what it does when it is accompanying certain words.
Yeah.
And that is one of the places where it's with the very little amount of effort, you could be enriched by the music. If you know what the words mean, all of a sudden, even if you're not proficient in music, you could start to appreciate what is this melody trying to, what is its exegesis of this particular text?
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's a beautiful book I'm using with my students right now in the liturgical year course. It's called the Gregorian Missal, and it takes the contemporary Roman Rite as the basis, and it takes the chants in Latin and then gives them all English translations. So you can kind of read them and then listen to recordings or sing them yourself. My class has a lot of sacred music students, so we're having them sing and people are joining in, and then we're kind of talking through the theology of the texts, as well as today, for instance, we sang the English hymnody for the Divine Office. So we were thinking about the themes of Lent in kind of one hymn by Gregory the Great, one hymn from the 10th century. And we were having a nice time comparing and contrasting kind of this hymn is emphasizing our effort. This one's emphasizing God's grace. And I think the chant tradition, some of it's very scripturally based, others is newly composed, but it all kind of has this way of giving you access to really deep ideas, but in a way that's attractive because they're kind of set to music.
Cool. Yeah.
As you know, like in Rhythms of Faith, we have the students work together in groups to compose musical settings for the liturgy. And I'm kind of wondering, is there advice you would give about a starting point for doing a musical exegesis for people who are writing liturgical text for the first time? And they're doing oral composition. So we might have people doing improvisation that have never had a musical technique class, or they don't know method.
Right.
So is there advice you would give on kind of how to enter for the first time into that kind of exegetical project?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a twofold answer. One is to really pray with the text, to let the text not just be kind of a canvas to paint on musically, but rather to be a source that's kind of leading you inward. So that would be the first thing. The second is, especially in new compositions, to let the text lead you, not just theologically, but also rhythmically, musically, finding a rhythm of faith that emerges from the text. So I think, to let especially scripturally inspired texts, which are so rich on so many levels, far beyond what any of us can understand on a single hearing, I think just letting them speak to us is one fundamental thing.
Yeah, that's great. And definitely something anyone can do, I think.
Yeah.
You mentioned divine office. What is the divine office?
Yeah, so the divine office, that's one term for what's also sometimes called the liturgy of the hours, occasionally referred to as the breviary. So it's a way of marking the hours of the day with special times of prayer. So especially the morning and the evening, but also before going to bed, sometimes the middle of the day, taking a rest from our work and focusing our attention on God. So the idea of sanctifying the time, sanctifying the hours goes back to the earliest days of the church, and over time a more formal way of praying with particular psalms for particular hours and hymns that might kind of mention the time of day. It's the sun's rising, so I'm thinking about God's creation. And the liturgy of the hours fundamentally is about sanctifying time by kind of being in tune with the cycles of the day, of the seasons, of the years, of our whole lives, and letting everything be sanctified through that.
And what does music and singing and have to do with your vocation as a priest, as a Dominican?
Yeah, so every priest is called to pray the divine office for the whole world, which is a really beautiful kind of oath one makes. And all people in the church are invited to this prayer. And it's a way of kind of praying for others and praying for oneself. And again, having the sense of being in tune with the world, in tune with God. So I think that's a really fundamental thing. I was attracted to the Dominican order in particular, partially because of our tradition of balancing prayer and study and doing both of these things for the sake of preaching. So we really try to mark our days by observing the hours as well as taking time for study. But we're doing it not just for its own sake, but also for the sake of serving the church, serving people.
Very cool. Yeah.
I was going to say, one of the reasons that JJ and I chose the title for the podcast and also for our class, Rhythms of Faith, is because of the repetitions that are built in to the Liturgy of the Hours, to the weekly cycle, and then also to the annual cycle. And I know the liturgical year is one of your passions. So what's that role of rhythmic repetition for you in the liturgy?
Yeah, it's interesting to think that the liturgy is a participation in the life and mysteries of Jesus Christ. And Jesus only had to live through things once to kind of fully do them. But we kind of need more time. We need to kind of let the mysteries sink in. So we do things over and over again, not because God hasn't done enough, but because we need to be attuned to his reality. So the liturgical year in particular, I think one way of understanding it is that we're entering into the mysteries of the life of Christ. So what he did once for all time, we do again and again to kind of conform ourselves to it. We're reminded of the past, but the past is in a way made present for us. So like when we're celebrating, especially the Easter mysteries, so Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter, we're in a way suffering with Christ, we're dying with him, and we're rising with him. This goes back, of course, to St. Paul. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So I think we need to do this again and again so that we can be fully attuned to it. But it's primarily God's work.
Yeah, because it's not a one and done type of thing. It's a constant conforming over and over to this way of being.
Yeah. I often think about that line from the gospel where Jesus is asked, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? Do I have to do it 7 or 77 times? And Jesus is saying we need to do it again and again. And sometimes we think of it as different things we need to forgive people for. You've done 10 different things against me. But sometimes if you've really hurt me, I need to forgive you over and over again. So I need to renew that act of forgiveness. And I think that's a little bit what's going on with the liturgy. Again, it's that fundamentally, when I really try to forgive someone from my heart, then I've done it. And yet I need to renew that.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that. And very easy to relate with, because it's oftentimes we think, oh, am I good in your book?
Yeah.
And
we good?
Yeah. And it's like, well, maybe not, and maybe the offense is also emblematic of the nature of the relationship,
right?
And its essence. And so it's that forgiveness is a way for the relationship to continually be reformed.
Yeah. And I think we could also think positively about things we do over and over again. Like for those who are married, you renew your wedding vows on certain occasions, but really you're living out that mystery of the vow again and again. And I think in this positive way to again and again say, I love you, Lord, or I love you to your spouse. And just to be able to have that sense of the repetition strengthens us in our ability to really speak truly.
Very cool. Yeah.
I loved what you said about balancing work or prayer and study. Listen to me. Balancing prayer and study in the pursuit of preaching. And one of the things most of our students in the class are praying with the Liturgy of the Hours for the first time. And I think everybody at Notre Dame feels like they're too busy all the time. And I dare say everyone that listens to this podcast feels like they're too busy all the time.
How many of you are on double speed right now?
Yeah, right.
Right. Call them out like that. Yeah, go ahead. I had them apologize to me about this last time we taught the class. I listened to it, but I listened to it on 1.5 speed. You're fine.
1.5, that's pretty generous.
Yeah, that's actually okay, right? But I'm curious kind of what kind of pastoral advice would you give to people who are trying to make space, not just in their schedule, but also in their mind and their heart for prayer, even as it feels like our world just goes faster and faster?
Yeah. I mean, I love that line from the Psalms, be still and know that I am God. There's this sense, even Jesus in his humanity needed to have time away from his work, to go into the wilderness to pray, to be able to go again and again to pray for his disciples. We often see in the Gospels him taking time before important decisions to go and pray. And of course, that wonderful scene in the Garden of Gethsemane where he says to his disciples, can you not pray 1 hour with me? But I think about a wonderful story about Mother Teresa, who she once was was told by one of her sisters that she didn't have time to pray, for a full hour. And so the response was, well, do it for 2 hours. And sometimes, we don't want to turn our prayer into something that's just athletic endurance. And yet, on the other hand, I think there's a profound truth to letting the time for prayer, once we give that time, God gives us back what we need. I think it's really comes back to that sense of Jesus, I trust in you. That God is one of the beautiful hymns we were talking about today in class was how Christ is he's the creator of time. And then the hymn goes on to talk about how he then spends 40 days in the desert. And so the one who's outside of time has entered into time, created time, and then redeemed time by himself, kind of wasting time. So I think that sense of the sacrifice of our time is one way to think of it.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up question? Sure. What about students who worry that they find themselves distracted or they're really struggling to pay attention when they're praying?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say fundamentally that it's not just about us and our own effort. It's about God's presence. So like when we spend time with our parents, for instance, especially when we go home from a college, during a college break or whatever, we might still be preoccupied with something that we're worried about, but our parents are so happy to have us in the kitchen again, even if they're annoyed that we're kind of distracted or whatever. And so I think God is the same in a way.
Except maybe not annoyed.
Yeah, exactly. No, precisely. Thank you. But, there's this sense of how a little bit is better than nothing. So I think kind of just not worrying about it. I think of another great line from St. John Vianney. He once noticed that there was a man who was very devoted to just spending time alone in church. And he asked the man, what do you do that whole time? And the man says, I look at him and he looks at me. And I think that really profoundly captures this, that even if I'm distracted, God's still looking at me. He's still basking in my presence. It's even more so about me basking in his. But
yeah. What are some of the relationships you see between music in general, and liturgy?
Yeah, I think one of the fundamental similarities is that both need to be done in order to exist. So like we can write down notes for a musical piece, or we can write down words in a liturgical book, but the notes aren't the music, the words aren't the liturgy. In both cases, you have to kind of enact them for it to exist. So I really love ballet, especially the New York City Ballet, and their great choreographer, George Balanchine, would often say, there is only now. So dancing has to be done to exist. A recording of it isn't the dance, right, or the rendition of it. And I think liturgy and music are the same way. They have to be done again and again in order to exist.
Yeah. Going back to the Gregorian chant, could you tell us what are some different Gregorian chants? Like when are they sung? What moments in the liturgy? And how do they differ based on what function maybe they were written for? Yeah,
it's a great question. So probably the one that most people are familiar with, they might not even realize it's a Gregorian chant, is the Our Father that we often sing at Mass. Our Father who art in heaven. That you're sort of singing the words in a very simple way, and the rhythm of it's kind of free, and there's basically one note per syllable. That's kind of the basic fundamental level of chant, whether it's done in English or Latin or whatever language. So in the Mass, there's the dialogues between the priest and the congregation. So those are often done in a kind of very simple chant. So that's kind of the base level, and that kind of syllabic thing where you just start, it's really just a way of getting the words expressed. And then
so the dialogues, like the Lord be with you, those where we're going back and forth.
Exactly.
Is what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. So those are kind of one of the earliest layers of chant, that dialogue that we say before the Eucharistic prayer as part of the opening of the Eucharistic prayer. That's really kind of one of the earliest parts of our liturgy. It transcends different locations. And just when we chant that, it might have been a slightly different melody here or there, but to think that we're kind of in tune, not just with God, but also with everybody who's gone before us in the church. So that sense of like our voices come together in that is a really fundamental thing. And then there's more elaborate chants, like an entrance chant for the Mass is slightly more elaborate. It's not always easy for a big group to sing it, but maybe a choir. And then some of the really complicated ones, like the tract we were talking earlier, that's really kind of a soloist genre originally.
And where does the tract go?
So the tract is during Lent, you would sing it instead of the Alleluia as a way of kind of having a penitential reflection on the words.
Mhm.
So just all these different genres. The thing about chant is that it's meant to be fit to the liturgical action. So, you have a more meditative thing when the purpose is to just think and listen. And then you have a more active kind of style when it's about sort of accompanying actions like processions or other sorts of events going on.
Yeah. And you mentioned that a lot of the texts for these are based on the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this incredible repository of text that goes along with the liturgy that is the basis for the entrance, for example, or the offertory or communion. And
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. So could you repeat the question again, actually?
Yeah. Like I'm asking about the propers.
Yeah, right.
Like where do we get these texts from
Great
for
question.
the entrance, for the offertory, etc.?
Exactly. So basically it seems like the earliest type of chant that was sung in the liturgy, other than these very simple dialogues, would have been a chant in between the readings. So we have references already from St. Augustine and others about some sort of repeated chant and taken from a psalm typically and then elaborated. And then over the centuries, new chants were written for different parts of the Mass. So like the introit, the entrance chant, is one of the richest types. So like here at Notre Dame, we give the Laetare medal every year. So that word laetare comes from the introit, the entrance chant for the fifth Sunday, or rather the fourth Sunday of Lent. And so that in that case, it's taken from the book of Isaiah. So it's thinking about the rejoicing of Jerusalem. Most of them are taken from the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorites is the introit for Easter Sunday. So it says, "I have arisen and I am with you still."
Mm.
And it's in that case, it's a verse from Psalm 137 or 138, depending on the numbering. And it's basically Christ's voice speaking to us. So the church, whoever composed these things, they seem to predate St. Gregory the Great even. Some of the earliest chants, they take these psalm verses and they read them as prophetic witnesses of Christ. So it's, in a way, I like to think of it as being similar to how at the road to Emmaus, Jesus goes through the prophets and the law and talks about how that points to him. So in a way, the chant of the church to me is a way that the church kind of tries to imagine what that conversation was like. So they're often, read, they're a little different if we just look at them on their own, but they're brought into a kind of liturgical cycle that lets us see deep connections between the Hebrew scriptures as well as the Christian revelation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times it's almost like we might not even be aware of like the profundity of these particular moments in the liturgy.
Yeah.
And what is accessible through engagement with them if we're only able to kind of notice.
Yeah, one beautiful experience I had a chance to help build up a music program at a parish in New York City, and we would sing the communion antiphon in English at most of our masses. And after about a year and a half of this new program, a gentleman came up to me who was one of our lectors, and he said, I thought it was really interesting the way at communion we were hearing these words that we also heard in the gospel, and I thought that was really neat. And to me, it was really a beautiful moment because this was a guy who was really engaged in the life of the parish, but he wasn't especially like obsessed with liturgy, but he was noticing something really profound. But it had taken him a year and a half to notice it. But for him, this was a beautiful discovery. It reminds me of that moment I had of seeing that connection of the Vespers and the Mass. And so I think it's like gets back to this question about repetition, that many of these things, hearing them the first time, we don't fully understand them, but encountering them again and again gives us a sense of their full mystery.
Yeah. Does it give us a sense of the fullness of the mystery, or?
It lets us enter into it. Yeah. No, we're never going to get all the way, but I think the things can be savored maybe over the course of years, and we see different angles, different insights into it.
Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now, research-wise.
Yeah. So my main project at the moment is about St. Thomas Aquinas in the liturgy. So this is something I've been really interested in for a long time. So St. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican friar in the 13th century, one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the church. And what I'm interested in is, how did the liturgy form him? How did he think about God differently because he prayed rather than not prayed, as it were? So I got interested in this topic when I was reading through the Summa Theologiae, his most famous work, the Sum of Theology or Summary of Theology. And he often will say, it says in the collect such and such, or the church sings such and such. And I started to notice he would quote particular prayers over and over again. And there's two in particular that are really kind of part of his way of thinking about God. One says, it's proper to God to be merciful and to spare. So this is part of God's very nature, is what the prayer is saying. And then another one says, God shows his power, his omnipotence, most of all in his mercy. And these two prayers, they go back to the earliest books we have of the liturgy. So the earliest sacramentaries, the book the priest would use at Mass. And Thomas was clearly very thoughtful about these prayers. And it's interesting, I was able to trace Pope Francis. A lot of his emphasis on divine mercy was directly influenced by both these prayers in themselves, but also he quotes some of these reflections by Thomas where he's quoting these things. So what I've started to realize is that it's not just the prayers, it's also the chants. He'll often kind of quote particular psalms with the way they were chanted rather than the way he might have read them in a Bible. And then similarly, the way he would hear or read in the Mass, the scripture readings, sometimes you can note with precision that he's quoting this scriptural version rather than the Latin Vulgate version that he would have had in his kind of pocket Bible. So to me, it's something we all experience, I think. We're all influenced by what we're consuming or what's going on around us. But with Thomas, you can kind of trace it through the textual influence.
Yeah. Are you going to be looking at those musical settings as part of what he's drawing on in his theological work?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the interesting things is that for Thomas, the melodies, I mean, this is a human phenomenon, melodies help us remember a text more, so like for those of you who are composing new pieces, like as you really work on a particular psalm verse or whatever, you're going to remember it better. So choose well which one you want to focus on. If you want to go with one of the cursing psalms, that's okay. But, maybe think about one of the praise psalms to really spend time meditating on. But yeah, so for Thomas, the melodies, I think, just as a human being, would have helped him remember the text.
Sure.
But one of the interesting things as well, so those of you who have had a chance to go to Eucharistic adoration would have sung hymns by Thomas Aquinas. So the opening chant that's sung, the O Salutaris or the O Saving Victim, and then the closing one, the Tantum Ergo, both of those are from Thomas Aquinas's hymnody that he wrote for the Feast of Corpus Christi. And one of the interesting things is he's making kind of musical theology as he's choosing his melodies. The melodies mean something for him. He wants to link your mind to the incarnation of Christ as well as his ascension, just to give one example. So Thomas was both influenced by the liturgy, but he's also profoundly marked the liturgical lives of Roman Catholics throughout the centuries that have followed.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience of music?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family that really encouraged all of us children to pursue whatever interests we had. So my parents were really generous with letting me do different musical instruments as I was growing up. They had one rule, which was if I decided to do something, I had to do it for 1 year.
Oh, cool.
So I couldn't stop midway through, but I could switch the next year. So I did trombone for 1 year, I did saxophone for 1 year, and I kept doing different instruments. My first instrument was the harpsichord, which is an unusual thing. My dad had a harpsichord at home. So but yeah, I kept going around to different ones. The instrument I still play the most is the Irish flute. So that's one that has gone for more than a year. So about 25 years now. But I love playing Irish music because it's kind of a fun form of music. It's similar to Gregorian chant in some ways, rhythmically different. But it's got that same kind of intense focus on the melody, but an infinite variation. It all sounds the same if you're not familiar with it. But once you get into it, there's a lot of depth to the repertoire. So I love traditional Irish music as kind of a pastime. But then I spend a lot of time studying Gregorian chant, studying early manuscripts of it, and thinking about how to make some of these ideas available to contemporary worshipers, whether in English adaptations or in some contexts, Latin versions of it as well. Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a singer?
Let's see. It's a good question. I would say I sing, but yeah, I'm not a magician, for instance. But yeah,
but you know a couple magic tricks.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So,
But in spite of the fact that you only sing,
yeah.
What is the significance of the fact that you do sing, and especially the fact that you sing while you pray?
Yeah, I mean, there's a beautiful line from St. Augustine. To sing belongs to a lover. Singing is a lover's thing. So, speech is the way we kind of normally interact. But, there's something about when you really want to express your emotions, you'll often break into song. If you go to the opera a lot, you do it more often than otherwise. But I think that sense of like, to sing is to do, there's an old saying attributed to Augustine, to sing is to pray twice. With both of them, I think it's capturing the sense that our voices are even more elevated when we sing. So I think, pray. You don't have to sing in every liturgical context. Sometimes it's good to be quiet or to have a more kind of somber occasion. But I think singing is such an expression both of joy, but also lament. It's a deeply human action.
And should we all sing, you think?
I think everybody can sing. I think people sometimes, there's this myth out there of people being tone deaf. I think that's actually more of a myth than anything else. I think all of us with enough encouragement, enough training can sing a little bit.
Yeah.
And one thing I love about the chant tradition is it assigns very simple melodies to priests. So it doesn't say priests need to be great singers to be good priests, but the singers, they get the more complicated ones, the choir, the whatever. And it's a good sense that like people do have different talents. But each of us can do more than nothing.
Yeah. Cool.
Tell us about your books that you like to read for fun.
Yeah, so I really love British literature. My current, I go through different obsessions with different authors, and my friends always get tired of me saying, have you read this book? Yes, you've already asked me that 10 times.
Then,
oh, sorry.
I'm not tired of this yet.
Yeah, so no, I read some books that are serious and other books that are kind of embarrassing, so my embarrassing one I finished recently was the entire Jack Reacher series.
Oh, cool.
Which are kind of fun. They're all the same, but they're all kind of interesting. I've finished all of those. So now I'm reading through Tom Clancy. So
nice.
I kind of enjoy that sometimes, but the literature I really love is kind of British literature, especially 19th century. Jane Austen is one of my favorites at the beginning of the 19th century, but Anthony Trollope would be one of my others. And I particularly love, Shirley Hazard is one 20th century author I really like. She wrote a series of very precisely written novels, and there are lines from those that I've memorized that are so amazing to kind of think about the world by means of them. So I love literature that helps you kind of see the world with fresh eyes. Jack Reacher lets you see it, with a little bit of suspicion, but these other things are, I think, more illuminating.
I think Jane Austen is like that for me.
Yeah.
We would love to have you answer one of our final exam questions for our students. And they're meant to be broad, but also they're meant to, really try to understand what the students have learned through the course on a general question, like what is liturgy? Right. And so what is liturgy? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, if I had a good answer, I'd be out of a job, I think. No, liturgy is... I think it's fundamentally a way of participating in the mystery of Christ.
That's a good answer.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's something that we do, but it's even more primarily something God does in us. So I think we've talked several times about the idea of rhythm, of entering into repeated actions, and also the sense of being in tune with other things. And I think that the liturgy, it lets us be ourselves, but part of what we are is being made in the image and likeness of God. So I think when we celebrate the liturgy, we're kind of enacting that reality that we are. And that reality, it's not about being self-referential, liturgy isn't just about us, but we are part of the subject, but part of what we are also is the body of Christ. And so Christ is acting in us as well. So it's a way, I think, in which we enter into the mystery more deeply.
Cool. And we finish each episode with a silly and fun question, which is, if you were an animal, which animal would you be and why?
Well, I think as a Dominican, I'm obliged to say a dog. Because the Dominicanes, the canis in Latin is the word for dog. So the dogs of the Lord, Domini, the Lord, canes. But I think as an individual, I would say I'd like to be a monkey. I already kind of am, but I love I don't have a tail. That's the only thing that I'm lacking. But no, monkeys, I think they capture the kind of inventiveness, of the delight in creation. I've never had a pet monkey, but if I could have one, I'd like to name it Maiski and have it kind of fetch little drinks for me, teach it how to use the coffee machine. But yeah, I think being a monkey would be kind of fun.
Great. Nice.
Great. Would you be your own pet monkey then?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it's turtles all the way down, I guess. Yeah. But
thanks for that reference.
Would I be my own monkey? If I was a monkey, I could at least be somebody's pet monkey. So
that's great.
You'd need a permit to get me. But,
right, exactly. Special permission.
Absolutely wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Father Innocent, for joining us for the Rhythms of Faith podcast. It's always a real pleasure.
Great to be with you. And be sure to re-listen on one speed or even slower, because I've been talking fast.
Yeah, Father Innocent talked fast on purpose. So that one-time speed is sufficient. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Great to be with you guys.
We'll let them know in advance.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks. Well, thanks for coming. And thanks to you all for joining us for this episode of the Rhythms of Faith podcast.